My name is Mike Decker, and joining me in the studio today is my cousin, Brian Klock.
I'm glad to be here.
Brian Roger Klock.
Yeah.
So maybe, Brian, just for the sake of people tuning in who maybe don't know you, why don't you just give us a brief snapshot of sort of what industry you're in and maybe what your claim to fame might be? Because you do have a widget that's a bit of a big deal.
Bottom line is, I started my own motorcycle shop called Klock Werks in 1997. And our big break, if you will, came in 2006. We had been asked to do the biker build-off for the Discovery Channel in 2004.
So what is that? What's, for those of us who are not maybe in the motorcycle industry, what would be a biker build-off?
So it's you against another person. Okay?
It's a competition.
And it's a competition. You have 10 days to build a bike. And in those 10 days, they're going to film you the whole time. And you can't work on the bike unless they're there filming you. So it's a lot of pressure. It's something you're not used to. It takes you out of your norm. And everybody knows, TV being what it is, nothing goes right in 10 days. And it's hard to do that.
Did they have Red Bull back then?
They did, but it just wasn't the point. You know, the point is you just stayed up because you were on full adrenaline. And even if the camera guys would fall asleep, they would literally leave cameras posted all over the room and be watching you the whole time. So I got asked in 2004, and honestly, I was scared. We talked about fear this morning in church, and it was one of those deals where I was scared. I was scared of success, and I was scared of failure, and I didn't understand that. And so when they called me and said, "We want you to be on this TV
competition.
show, this competition," it was in a single car garage. Had 2 employees and a mentor, so there was basically 4 of us that would show up around this motorcycle area. Our mentor at the time had cancer, and so we moved everything out of his garage at his house into a setting downtown behind the hair salon, behind Prestige Hair Salon in Mitchell. And fast forward to, they called, wanted me to do the show, and I said no. I said, "You can't even turn your cameras around in here. It's a 700 square foot single car garage." I said, I don't want to do it. And everybody's like, "Man, that's crazy."
Now, how did they find you?
Through the magazines. So magazines were a big deal at that point. Motorcycle magazines were a big deal. And I always sat in high school and thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if ever I built a car or a truck or a motorcycle that was in one of these magazines? That would be awesome. That would be like winning the Super Bowl. That would be as big as it could get.
So you're building bikes, and at this point, someone's recommended you to somebody?
No, my personal bike, I was in Sturgis. We were in the city park, and it was the Rats Hole show. And Chris Maida from American Iron came up and said, "I'd like to shoot your bike for the magazine."
Okay.
And I said, I really rather you didn't. I don't think I want to do that. And the reason was, again, because if people saw that I built this bike, they'd be like, "Hey, can you build me one? Can you do this for me?" Well, it took me 2 years to do that one. It took me 2 years to come up with the money, to perfect the ideas. And everybody, when I was building it, was like, "You're never going to get that together." It was one of those things. You're never going to this. You're never going to that. And I always had a big vision. They said, "Man, that's going to be great. You're going to win the Cars in the Park show down here, that they have on Father's Day in Mitchell, South Dakota." And like, I don't really care about winning that. I want to win Sturgis.
So Mitchell,
I want to win
Dakota
Daytona.
is
I want to win the big one,
known for its Chislic. That's how I know Mitchell and the Corn Palace. But okay, how old are you at this point?
I was probably, when I did my first bike, I want to say I was maybe 20. And I'd owned a couple Harleys before that, and Harleys were interesting to me because I could buy them, I could do some stuff to them and customize them and sell them and make, I made $500 my first bike. The next one, man, I rode it all summer. I rode it to Daytona and back, and I sold it. I made $800. I thought, well, this is great. You can actually use a toy and then sell it and make some money.
Take us to today, and then we'll go back in time a little bit. So what is Klock Werks?
So Klock Werks is a group of 17 people. Okay, in Mitchell, South Dakota.
Population of Mitchell
is 15,000 people roughly.
Okay, geographically in the state?
It is on the east side of the state, so we're about 4 hours from Sturgis.
Okay.
Which is a marker for motorcycle people. But we're on the east side of the state, and literally if you, just go a little ways. We're an hour from Sioux Falls, which is the biggest city in South Dakota. If you went straight down, we're straight up and down from like Oklahoma City, Dallas, Texas kind of area. Okay, so we're on that side of the state. About 5 hours from Minneapolis, 3 hours from Omaha.
Okay.
We managed to carve out a niche there of building motorcycles. Building motorcycles then became making motorcycle parts. I always thought that we could make a name for ourselves and brand some motorcycle parts. The first year we took 35 parts to Drag Specialties, and they picked them up. They took a chance on us. And in 2004, I was asked to be on the Discovery Channel Biker Build-Off.
Okay.
I turned it down because I was like, you can't even turn your camera around. I'm in a 700 square foot single car garage. 2006, Hugh King, who was the director of that show and the producer, came again and said, you haven't escaped my radar. I still want you to be on my show. And that show was pretty popular at the time. And when the opportunity came, I presented it to my team, and I think there was 5 of us at the time, and it created a bit of an argument. Well, we could build a chopper, we could build a this, we could build a that. And I wanted to build a bagger, which is a touring bike with usually a fairing and a radio.
Okay.
And saddlebags, hard saddlebags or leather saddlebags. But it was something you went long distance on, and they weren't cool. They were called geezer glides, grandpa glides, but the proper name for them was electric glides, okay, or tour glides.
Okay.
And we were making fenders for them. We were stretching fenders for them because that was my dad's age group. Okay, those guys had bikes and they had some money. The other thing we were doing was building Sportsters because that a Sportster was a cheaper model and you could access that, and kids were wanting them. And I would almost do the work for free for the kids in my town because I wanted to customize it, and I just needed the base motorcycle to work on. It was me and Dan Cheeseman and Chris Weber and our mentor John Patton. We started this all in his garage. Well, now fast forward to modern day Klock Werks. In 2006, we did the biker build off. We won the competition, and I figured we would lose because we were building a bagger. The other kid was building this cool little chopped down bike, which was the hot thing at the time. We went on to Bonneville, set the land speed record for the world's fastest bagger. My ex-wife Laura was the pilot of that bike. It became a phenomenon. And on the way home, we said, the bike still shakes at 125. It goes into this wobble. What causes that? And really, the bike was lifting. You could just feel it coming up. The faster you go, the faster it went. Then the front end would start shaking.
So the aerodynamics of a motorcycle at that level, it starts to basically fly.
Yeah, it is. It's becoming, it's a kite.
Yeah.
So a stock bike, we learned later, has 30 pounds of lift, and this windshield we designed added 15 pounds of downforce. We ended up in the wind tunnel in Mooresville, North Carolina, where they do all the NASCAR testing. We were at a show in Myrtle Beach, and a guy said, man, weren't you scared riding that bike? And Laura said, well, yeah, I was, but, Brian designed something and has this windshield that it keeps it more stable, but we're not sure what we're going to do with it. Well, no one's going to believe us unless you take it into a wind tunnel. We don't have the money to go to a wind tunnel. He said, well, my friend does NASCAR Truck Series trucks. You should call him. I called him, and he said, well, stop by. And I stopped by, and he ended up taking us to the A2 wind tunnel in Mooresville, North Carolina. And the whole time we're walking through there, I told the guy, I said, we don't have the money for this. We can't afford this. And finally, he looked at me, and he said, you need to shut up. I said, really? He said, yeah, we're going to make sure that she's safe and that the bike does what it's supposed to do. We're motorcycle guys. And I thought, oh, that's cool, Well, before we got home, he had sent me a proposal and said, here's the payment plan. You can knock this down over the course of 6 months and then come back to the wind tunnel. And we did that. And sure enough, Laura's on the bike. They start cranking up the wind tunnel, and the bike just starts going like this. You can see it just picking up because now you're not watching it on a racetrack. Mm-hmm. You're just watching it come up. And put the windshield on, close the door, wave to the tower, and they did it again. And you could watch the bike just going 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. The faster you went, the more it was settling in. And so if you've ever
I've experienced that, by the way, at those speeds, it does handle nice.
And if you've ever gone by a semi and see a motorcycle kind of go like this, it's because it's already a kite, and then that blast of air coming off the semi just makes it wiggle. And so that little phenomenon and that farm kid mentality of just sticking your hand out the window and go, this makes your hand go up, this makes your hand go down, here's how we're going to work it, became the number one selling part in America in the V-Twin motorcycle industry in 2009 and 2010. It was named the V-Twin Product of the Year. They told me I'd sell 500 in the life of the motorcycle. And I went into a Drag Specialties dealer meeting or a representative meeting of all their drag reps. And cocked off, if you will, and said, I think we can sell 20,000 of them. Fred Fox walked out and he came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, shot kind of high in there, didn't you, kid? I said, I don't know, did I? And he goes, yeah. He goes, we've only ever sold 17,000 of one item. This is the motorcycle industry. If you sell 5,000 of something, you're doing great. It's probably not going to happen. I said, okay, fair enough. I said, well, I got a year to prove it. And the big lump welled up in your throat and you walk downstairs and you're like, wow, that's a bummer. So I'm nervous, right? I'm backed into a corner. I'm scared. And that's probably where I work the best. You know, I'm the guy who says it takes pressure to make diamonds. So now I'm standing there and I'm like, hey, do you think, you know, you could use these windshields? And I'm talking to the reps. And then one guy says, I think I can sell 10. I think I got 5 guys who will use it. And I'm like, okay, well, I at least got to get to that 500 number because I got to meet that goal and make sure I sell them. But I got to sell all 500 in this year. We sold 18,500 windshields that year. Got the attention of everybody, including corporate Harley. And they eventually copied or did something similar, I should say, to my windshield. And man, I was bummed out. You know, I stood there in just in tears, honestly, and talking to my staff. And I said, it's over. You know, we're up against Goliath. This is as big as it's going to get. And I don't know what to tell you other than we're done. Harley has come out with a product that looks exactly like ours. And I went to my desk and I prayed about it. And I said, okay, God, I don't understand what you want me to do. And he's like, I want you to write a letter. And I wrote a letter to Willie G. Davidson, and you know, son of Harley Davidson. He was the face and the guy.
Okay.
20 years prior, he had told me I had a future in this industry. He loved my bike. Said, man, it's a good eye. You know, you're going to be up there someday with the likes of Arlen Ness and Donnie Smith, the greatest motorcycle customizers I know. And I thought, well, that'll never happen. Those guys are my heroes. You know, they're huge. And now all of a sudden he was taking the food off my family's plate because he copied this windshield. And I told my team, I said, you know, the only thing you can do in this moment is not talk bad about their product, but really talk good about our product. And I think that's where the positivity came in the whole situation. Was like, okay, we do have a good product. It does make a difference. It does make your bike handle better. It does enhance your riding experience. You can hear your stereo better, all these things. So just talk about our product. And people knew, and people were pushing our buttons going, you got to fight, you got to sue them, you got to this, you got to that. And we just didn't have the money to do it. And I sent Willie that letter, and that year at Sturgis, he came up and he goes, man, Brian, how are you doing? I said, good. And I said, did you get my letter? He said, did you get my reply? I said, from some lawyer who said you're not in violation. I said, that kind of sucked. He goes, well, you know how it is. And I said, you know what? I don't. I don't care if you're the president of the United States. You were good to me. You were kind to me, and you gave me encouragement. I took that, and I built a whole life on the brand that you set out. And now that I've done that, and now we have a problem, I said, they're telling me it's going to take $50,000 just to get in the ring and start the fight. And I know that you have more money than me, and Harley Davidson corporate does, and you'll wear me out. And I said, I would rather you would have called me and said, give $50,000 to this kid's charity, even if I had to go borrow the money from the bank and give it all away, and then we could have done some business. I said, it's not about my ego. I don't care if it says Klock Werks on there. I want to do the best thing I can for motorcycling. And I think we have. And he said, you know what? You're right. Give me your card. And 2 weeks later, I was on the phone with some guys from Harley Parts and Accessories. And they said, well, Brian, we think, you know, we're not going to go back on what we're doing. And I understand your corporate account. If you said you're wrong now, I have the ability to sue you. And I don't want to do that anyway. But I understand your position. And they said, we think the next big thing is these same windshields for Road Kings and Heritages. And I said, well, I'm done. Do you want me to send you one? And they said, no, that's okay. What if we're coming out with something like it? We don't want you to be mad. I said, I'm already mad. I'm already upset. And they said, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, well, I'm going to continue to sell one windshield for every one you sell until God decides it's done. And man, it got quiet on the other side of the phone. And they're like, you really believe that? I'm like, yeah, I do. I said, why is it some kid from Emory, South Dakota, population 380 or whatever it was, 13, 14 kids in my class, is sticking his hand out the window and figures out how to revolutionize air management for Harley Davidsons in particular, right? I said, that was a gift. We were broke. We had no money. We had put everything we could into this Discovery Channel build, and we were out of cash. And in fact, on the way home, from the wind tunnel, I got to a point where my card didn't work. I had no money. I was out of money. And I called a friend of mine. I could either go up around the mountain like the way I was supposed to go towards South Dakota and just be sitting there out of fuel, or I could go 100 miles south. And a guy I knew owned one of the biggest Harley dealerships in the world, and his name is Baldwin, and he lived in Gastonia, North Carolina. Click said, he finally answered the phone, and he said, "Man, what's the matter with you? You sound terrible." He's like, come down to my shop. I went down there, and his wife wasn't home, and he said, "Man, Diane would kill me, but there's some sheets laying on the bed. You have to make your own bed in there." But he's like, "You're going to stay at the house tonight. We're going to go get some dinner, and we need to talk." I said, "Well, Click, I need to sell you these 3 or 4 fenders I have. I need money. I'm broke. I have no money to get home, and I'm out of fuel, you know." And he goes, "Well, I don't want those fenders. I mean, they're good." But he said, "Here's $500. Will that get you home?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Well, you'll just pay me back someday. It'll be fine." And I had those fenders all the way home, and I thought next morning, I'm just going to try my card one more time, so at least I have this cash in my hand. That's my backup, right? By the grace of God, my card worked. I don't know why it worked. I don't know how it worked, but it worked. And they let me go over my limit or whatever the deal was, and I made it home, and I had that $500 the whole way as my backup plan. And it was such a relief to be able to send Click that money back and to know that someone who was so big in our industry believed in me. I think many times that's the thing. People just need someone to believe in them. Just like Willie G believed in me early on in my career. Donnie Smith believed in me when I called and asked him questions. Arlen Ness, I would see him at shows and he would believe in me, right? And believing in someone sometimes means you're humbling yourself. You're not talking about yourself, you're listening.
So for our listeners, Brian, through the grace of God, to his what I've heard you say is God gave you an idea that allowed a motorcycle to be driven safer. He created this windshield. So for those of you if you ride a motorcycle or you're out, if you see these windshields on a motorcycle that are curved and you see a little spade on the front, that's Brian's. It looks like this. That's Brian's windshield. That's the Klock Werks windshield. And there's been many revisions and tweaks over the years and stuff. So, that's that wind management piece that the Lord really gave you. But there's the thing that's always attracted me, Brian, to the motorcycle industry, for lack of a better term, which you're really articulating, there's a sense of family. Right? Even among competitors, people from as big as, the big machine Harley Davidson to whatever, and you've been wired to, what do you think about you has made you take the high road where rather than sue somebody, and even if it's a losing cause, or rather than maybe puff out your chest and try to, get bigger, why do you continually, turn the other cheek? Where's that come from?
The 2 things. Okay, I had heroes. Okay, and those heroes were Donnie Smith and Arlen Ness. Okay, and guys like Jim Betlock from Drake Specialties, and those guys would give me the time of day. Those guys would give me the listen that I needed. Okay, and I always thought, man, these guys have the best motorcycles in the country. And yet they're willing to slow down enough to listen to me. And I thought I would love to be a gentleman like that someday and be able to have a car, a truck, or a bike that someone really thought was special, but I could feed into them and help them make their dream come true, right? And then the other side of it was, as we started doing business and started trying to grow Klock Werks and get bigger and moved from that little tiny 700 square foot building to a 7,500 square foot building right behind us, people came around me like Greg Wick. I had just bought some land out by the interstate with my dad and thought I was going to put this business out by the interstate. And within the same 30 days, the business right behind me, which was an old implement, comes for sale. And Greg Wick, who was wanting to build a bike with me from Rapid City, said, "You should buy that." I'm like, "I can't. We just took all the money we had, bought this land by the interstate." And he goes, "What do they want for it?" And he's like, "That's cheap." He's like, I'll buy it and you can just rent from me. Truth be told, I probably didn't pay him rent for the first 10 years. I mean, him and Sandy believed in me again.
So
and I think
what I'm
that's
hearing,
a reoccurring thing,
yeah,
you know?
people have invested in you. You've had sort of just goodwill people who have come along, saw potential in you. And that's really the invitation for us as leaders today, right? It's older to do the same in other.
It's like, how can you positively influence the people around you? Not just make your world better, make someone else's better. And I think that's what, that's what I always tell people, social media wise, right? God had 12 followers. He had these disciples. Okay. But more importantly, before he died for our sins on the cross, he said to people and said to his disciples in particular, right? These 12 guys, love one another. You know how hard that is?
Yeah.
Love one another. That means I got to think about you before you think about me. And I got to do something for you, right? And I can't be focused on me. I have to do it for you. And the more I do things for you, the more my world will get better, the more your world will get better. But that's what love one another is all about. And so these guys in the motorcycle industry had this camaraderie, and they were just helping me. They were just coming around and helping everywhere they could.
How did your childhood asthma shape you? And then we're going to get to the motorcycle. Okay. How did your childhood
way back.
asthma shape you?
This isn't really fair because Mike used to come to my house and ride horses and hang out. And I couldn't even do some of that. I couldn't go out to Grandpa Decker's and play in the hayloft with everybody, because the minute we would get in a hay fight or be chasing around or hiding behind the hay bales and stuff, that asthma would kick in and I couldn't breathe. And I had to go in the house. And I couldn't play sports. My brothers were all state basketball, all state football, all state track, choir, you name it.
Yeah, didn't Chad break Uncle Roger's high school high jump record or something?
And I couldn't do any of that stuff, right? And but I was a student manager for everything because I just wanted to be involved in some way, shape, or form.
So how did it shape you?
I think it shaped me because it made me try to be creative in my own way. It changed me because it made me feel like I was less than, and it sometimes made me feel like, I wasn't good enough. I was a failure. And so that's that moment where I tell you that I was as scared of success as I was of failure, because I didn't really know where I fit. I didn't really understand any of that. I was scared, I guess. That was the bottom line. Because when you're standing up, here's a good example. I'm leaning in this chair right now, okay? My back is arched because of my breathing, right? Because the only way you could breathe at night, Mom would get up with me, and I would literally put the car magazine or the comic book or whatever age I was, right, down on the floor, and I would sit like this, and I would just try to slow down my breathing because I was gasping for air and I'm waking up in the middle of the night because we were playing in the leaves during the day or something, and it got to me. And the only way I could do it was focus on something else. I had to focus on this reading, focus on whatever would distract my attention. You didn't have an iPad, you didn't have a phone to look at, you didn't, and there certainly wasn't anything on the 3 channels of TV we had at 2 a.m. You just looked at this thing you were reading, and that really kind of
started that creative component.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it is who I am. I mean, I fed my mind with these things,
I want to close our conversation, with this, Brian. You have recently, received a Mitchell Community Service Award in 2018, and did you ever think it would come through the lens? I mean, that's really what we're talking about, loving your city, right? And to think that God would use a motorcycle. If it wouldn't have been for your asthma, you would have been reading this magazine at 2:00 in the morning, because that's the position that you had to be in order to, and Mad Max was probably in there too, somewhere. But to think that, God never wastes an experience, and now fast forward all the way to current time, and your community recognizes you. What is that award? And then I guess really these last words will be yours. Like, what's the challenge? Like, what's the learning point that life has taught you, maybe about, if you can be real succinct, a fear and not to use the word failure, but just challenges and now suddenly opportunity. I think all of that is wrapped up in this Mitchell Community Service Award. What's the lesson? What's the transferable concept for everyone?
Well, the concept is, first of all, don't be afraid, right? God's given us, each and every one of us, talents, and each and every one of us is a leader. You've led a kid, you've taught someone how to throw a baseball, you've helped somebody ride a bike, you helped a neighbor just with directions from point A to point B. In every one of those spots, you were a leader. So be that leader in your community. Step in where you don't even know that you needed to step in, but God's tapping you on the shoulder and he's saying, you know what, you could help with that pool. You could help read books to kids. You could be there and you could actually set up that whole baseball field, or you could set up that whole infrastructure for something. And you know you can do it, but are you willing to do it? Are you willing to put yourself aside and say, God, yes, use my talents, use my gifts, and help me organize this? I mean, I've organized some events in Mitchell that have been starstruck almost for that little city. I mean, 5,000 people come downtown on a Thursday night. And it wasn't me performing. It was just my vision, and I have a good vision for this is where people are going to flow. This is maybe where they'll congregate. This is maybe where they'll socialize. But I'll tell you what, I can't do it with all the girls at the chamber helping me out and all the people in the city bringing down all the picnic tables and doing all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a team effort.
Every time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said 100 times it takes a team to win the Super Bowl, to my own team, right? Because we can make Klock Werks a great motorcycle brand, but it means that the guy who takes the first phone call to the person that puts it in that box and ships it to him has to have care and has to have a culture that says, I'm going to do everything I can so when this guy gets this, he's so excited to put this on his bike and he feels like he got a great experience. And I think that's just a great example. I mean, I don't know how else you better could live your life. And so when Mitchell recognized me for that, I was humbled, I was taken aback, and yet I got up there and I said some words, and they were God's words because I really wasn't prepared for that. And I think every time, if you just trust on him and say, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I can step forth in faith, you can do it. Like you can change the vision of anywhere you are. If you believe that we should have better soccer fields, or that's your heart, then let's do it, right? If you feel like that, just showing people how to decorate their house with flowers is a thing, then how could you step in? Can you help at the local chamber banquet and provide the flowers for that? There's 100 ways for you to give back the gifts and talents that God has given you.
So God's given everybody a gift and talent. What's your signature? That's maybe the takeaway for you to think about. Brian's lived a life where he has embraced his challenge. You're continually learning, whether we're doing it intentionally back, when you're younger or not, but you're treating people with kindness, which is your mom, my aunts, legacy. And, you are where you're at today. This is just so evident because of the investment of many people around you. Somebody who took an interest in you, whether it was Arlen Ness or Willie from, Harley Davidson,
yeah,
or whatever. And I think that's the invitation for all of us. And so what is being a city leader? A city leader is really stepping in, seeing a need and go, you know what, I can help you. I can give a little encouragement. I can give a little sweat equity. It doesn't have to be grandiose, but together.
Right. And you don't have to agree with, you don't have to take on my ideology, right? But we both know we have a gift. So let's use it. Let's work together. And I feel like, as you and I have talked about where you were going to go with this podcast and how are we going to start it and what's going to happen. And I was excited for you and Beto and for you guys to put this thing together. And as we talked about it, there's a reason that every 2 weeks now when I'm in California to see Ashlyn and Vanessa and I are here, that we come back to Palm Harvest. I mean, it's the positivity of the people. And you're the quarterback. You're leading that. You're leading that in Costa Mesa. You're leading that in the city. And when I first said it's the Palm Harvest positivity, you looked at me and you're like, that's not my thing. I don't know if that's me.
That's a little cheesy.
Right. and yet,
but it's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
And I mean, cheesy or not, it's like every guest you have on, and the more I see you interact with people within the city, you're not trying to shape the way they think. This isn't political. It's positivity. And if we just all had more positivity and we just really boil it down to loving one another, wouldn't it make things so much simpler? Instead of saying, I want this and you want that and we're going to get in a tug of war. No, I understand what you want and I can give you a little bit of that. Would you give me a little bit of this? And just by loving one another, that positivity can flow out and it can make your city a better place to live. It can make people be better. It can make your little community be better.
So find the good in stuff, people. You know, share a little positivity. If you're in the motorcycle industry and you like to ride a bike on two wheels that goes fast, consider getting the Klock Werks flare windshield.
There's my free plug for the
brings
day.
Brings a little safety to your ride and pleasure at the same time. It's been great having Brian in the house. I'll probably have him on the show again sometime. But from all of us here at the Palm Harvest City Leaders Podcast, I'm Mike Decker signing off with my cousin and brother and friend, Mr. Brian Klock.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Palm Harvest Podcast. Make sure you check us out at palmharvest.com.